Hi people, it's Archivist here, and today I want to talk about Apple's proposition that the iPad Pro with Magic Keyboard can in fact replace your computer. And well, to get straight to the answer, yes, for the average user, it can. It can browse the web fine, it can do Microsoft Office, it can play games, you can watch YouTube, go on Twitter, pretty much all the things an average user would want to do, the emphasis very much being on average. But of course, it is iPadOS, it can't do everything. So for me, for example, the reason I wouldn't throw out my MacBook Pro is that I can't use full Final Cut Pro on my iPad. I can only use LumaFusion, and don't get me wrong, LumaFusion's great, but Final Cut Pro would be better. And everyone's going to have a piece of software they use, or maybe multiple pieces of software they use, where the compatibility just isn't there on iPadOS. And for those people, such as myself, it can't replace it. But again, for the average user, for someone who doesn't spend every waking moment on their devices, who just pops on to maybe get a news update, send an email, it's going to do a fine job. So for the average person, it's going to be fine. But then we have to tackle another question. Why do I need to get an iPad Pro with Magic Keyboard to achieve this? Well, okay, so I'm putting something into Apple's mouth there myself, right? They don't necessarily say that the Magic Keyboard is necessary for it to accomplish that goal. I think Apple's idea is that the power of the iPad Pro with its powerful A-series chip is what gives it that ability to replace your computer, your main computer. Well, you know what? The iPad Air, which is a fair bit cheaper, can also easily replace your computer. It can do pretty much everything that the iPad Pro can do, just not quite as good. But the thing is, the iPad Pro is heavily overkill for most of what it does, to the point where, although its processor is a lot faster than what you'll find in the iPad Air, the ceiling is already hit. You won't notice much of a difference in terms of launching application responsiveness. One thing you will notice, to be fair, is the 120Hz screen on the iPad Pro, which definitely makes everything feel nicer, but I would argue primarily that's more of an aesthetic benefit, because it just makes things look more fluid, but in reality things don't look at all sluggish on the iPad Air. In fact, in terms of your main computer, most people are going to be using a 60Hz screen, so 120Hz is a bonus and not required for a full-on replacement. So we're already saying that the iPad Air could equally, especially if you equip a keyboard via the smart connector, also replace your PC or your Mac or your computer. But then, do we even need to go that far? Could we just use the base level iPad, the 10.2-inch iPad? And well, even though it's compromising in areas like screen quality, the processor gets even slower, in terms of those tasks I mentioned at the beginning, browsing the web, going on Microsoft Office, watching YouTube videos, it still does a great job. It's still a Retina quality screen, which is to say a very high resolution. It can still do all those things fine. And so if we jump back to the iPad Pro and consider the proposition that we are targeting an average user because a pro user will have their specific software, then although that is a correct thing to say for Apple in terms of the iPad Pro, and I wouldn't argue that, you could equally say the same thing of the base entry-level iPad. So I'm not here to say that the iPad Pro isn't a great product. This is mine, you see here. I'm absolutely loving it. The Magic Keyboard makes it such a joy to use and so versatile. It's absolutely fantastic. And in terms of enhancing the computer replacing experience, yes, I'm all for it. But in terms of necessitating the replacement of your computer, you don't need to go this far. You can very easily stop at the entry-level iPad. So those are my thoughts on the proposition by Apple that the iPad Pro can replace your computer. For the average consumer, the answer is a resounding yes, but with the caveat that for the average user, you don't actually need an iPad Pro to achieve that promise. As always, people, thanks very much for watching and see you next time.